One of my favorite topics to teach on is the subject of generosity. Probably because, quite honestly, I was not a generous person for a long time. In fact, I was the opposite of generous. I had the spiritual gift of being a tightwad. But God has truly done a work in my heart and helped me to learn the power of living a generous life. Proverbs 11:25 says, "A generous man will prosper, and he who refreshes others will himself be refreshed." In my book, The 5 Essentials of Life, I talk about 5 specific rewards or blessings, if you will, when we learn to be generous with our resources. But here's one of my favorites. I always receive more when I give. Luke 6:38 reveals one of the greatest generosity principles in all the Bible. It states, "Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure that you use, it will be measured back to you." One of those common mistakes that people make about this verse is assuming that Jesus is speaking only of money. In reality, he's revealing a principle that applies to every single area of our lives. But what do the terms good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over mean? Sounds like a little dance, doesn't it? You know, when I did the research, what I discovered was fascinating. In reality, these were farming terms. These were agricultural terms that were used to describe a bushel basket. People would make their living back then farming wheat and other crops, and at the end of the week, the employer would then pay his laborers a measure of wheat. It was what was going to sustain their families. If they were a good employer, it was customary that they would take these baskets and they would make sure that you first had a good measure, not just a partial measure or a half measure. It was going to fill the basket to overflowing. And then they would press it down to compress the grains together to make more room for additional wheat. And after topping off the basket again, they would then shake it to eliminate any space between the grains. So having done all that, you would then pour in as much grain as you possibly could, heaping it over the rim until it spilled over and was running over the sides. It was one thing to receive a basket of grain, but it was quite another thing to receive a basket that was a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over basket of grain. That's a pretty amazing promise when you think about it, but it has only one condition: you give. The point Jesus was trying to make was this: whatever you give, you're going to get a lot more of the same in return. Now remember, God's not some kind of cosmic vending machine where you put your money in, press the button, and poof, he gives you exactly what you want. I don't want you to hear that, but I do want you to realize that God does bless those who give. God gives us this promise not to create our motivation for giving, but rather to free us from the fear and show us the reward of giving. Here's the principle: you need to sow based on how much you want to harvest. Jesus said in Luke 6:38, "With the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you." Did you get that? That's a powerful principle to grasp. God doesn't decide how blessed you are. You get to decide how blessed you are. You have a measure, and if you're a really generous person, you have a large measure. If you're a chintzy, selfish, greedy person, you have a very small or non-existent measure. God doesn't decide how blessed we are. We decide how blessed we are. Imagine a farmer going out to his farm and saying, "What, I only have 10 stalks of corn in my field? I can't live on this." His friend says, "Well, how many seeds did you plant?" "Well, I only planted 10. "Well, according to your standard of measure, it's going to be measured back to us in return."